Hello, my name is Shaylin Clark, and this is my Chapter 13 lecture assignment. Now, what is conflict? So, conflict is basically going to be a person's psychological or behavioral response to someone either prohibiting their goals, challenging their actions, or disrupting what's expected within a relationship. Now, a key point when it comes to conflict is going to be perception and how these two individuals perceive said conflict. So, when there's a misperception of something being done or something being said, this could increase the likelihood of a conflict and a disagreement of what was actually perceived. Now, there's two different types of conflict. There's going to be dysfunction conflict and functional conflict. In dysfunction conflict, that's basically going to be a conflict in which prohibits work being done properly, while as a functional conflict, this is going to be a conflict that sort of promotes increased productivity. Now, there's different types of conflict. Now, basically, there's three different types of conflict, and they basically speak for themselves. There's going to be interpersonal conflict, in which it's just basically a conflict between two different people. There's going to be an individual group conflict in which there's going to be a conflict between one person and a conflict between there's going to be a conflict between one person and a whole different group of individuals. There's going to be a conflict between those two different things. And then there's going to be a group conflict, which involves one group and another group having a conflict with one another. There's also going to be different causes of conflicts. So there's going to be six different causes of conflicts usually. The first one being competition of resources, which is the demand for something is going to outweigh the actual supply as of what could be provided. There's also task interdependence, which is involves usually tasks being done having to be done in a certain order in order for it to get done. But if a certain task is disrupted and can't complete it, that stops the whole process of things getting done. It disrupts the process of other tasks being done because we're waiting for this one task to actually be able to continue with what needs to be done. Then there's the jurisdiction jurisdictional ambiguity, which is basically the unclear dynamic in which who is responsible for the task at hand. So basically, there's probably going to be a disagreement between the individuals with the conflict of who's supposed to do what or who has authority over who. This is basically going to be that jurisdictional ambiguity. We're going to also have communication barriers, which could involve physical, cultural, or psychological barriers that prohibit clear communication. This could be physical, like a loud environment, or cultural, which is a disparity in language or accents. There could also be psychological distress and the way you think. These things could prohibit clear communication and being able to get what is trying to be explained to the other person done. There could be a disparity between those two. There's also beliefs, which is basically an individual or group's personal values or belief system that starts to clash with one another. So some things like someone believing that they're better than someone or they're superior, things like that, their belief system and how they think is starting to clash with someone else who thinks a different way or has different beliefs or doesn't necessarily believe in what they believe. Then we also have personality, which is basically the traits that we possess, not really mixing well with other individuals. So maybe someone has a more loud personality as well as someone has a more shy and reserved personalities. These two personalities might clash with one another and there might be disparities or disputes with the between the two. We're also going to have different conflict styles. So basically, there's going to be five different conflict styles. First one being the avoiding style. Basically, in this avoiding style, there's going to be someone basically trying to ignore the conflict altogether. They're going to withdraw themselves and hope that the conflict is resolved by itself without them having to actually interact or do anything or try to put themselves with furthermore within the conflict. There's also going to be the accommodating style, which involves a conflict starting to occur, starting to brew up, and someone seeing that this conflict is about to start, and instead of letting it go any further, they accommodate the other person and just takes the loss and just gives into them and allows them to basically win in a conflict, and they just take a step back and allow them to accommodate the other person. There's also going to be a forcing style type of conflict, which basically involves this individual basically having this win or lose mindset that they have to come on top of the conflict and have control over what's going on within the conflict. There's also something there's also a collaborating style, which involves basically a win-win situation in which instead of trying to be on top and win a situation and make the other person lose, this collaborating style is going to involve the individual trying to come to a resolution for the conflict. They want to be able to make sure that they win as well as the other individual within the conflict also wins, and that the basically come to a full round off resolution for whatever conflict that they're dealing with. We're also going to have the compromising style, in which basically these two individuals or whoever is within the conflict are basically going to compromise on whatever's going on. They're going to basically give something, but also they're going to have something taken away from them. They're not going to have that full, well rounded win win. They're going to have a compromise. And sometimes in a compromise, you give something, but also you get something taken away from you. Um, we're also going to have different ways to resolve conflicts in which basically when a company is going to usually intend for the whoever's within the conflict, they're going to want you to resolve the conflict on your own. So whatever that means to resolve that conflict, whether there needs to be a conversation or there needs to be whatever it is to get to that agreement that with whatever happens within the conflict to get to a solution, they want you to work with that by yourself. But if that doesn't really occur, if the conflict starts to turn into a dispute, where the whoever's in the conflict, they're not necessarily agreeing with one another, at this point the company is going to have a formal policy on which how the conflict should be taken or how it should be handled from there on out. So basically, usually a formal policy, this is usually gonna, in most cases, gonna involve a third party intervention. Most third party interventions usually um involve either a mediation or arbitration. Mediation is going to involve that neutral third party member to come into the situation and allow that conversation to basically go forth so that the two parties could have a resolution through the neutral third party so that they could come up with something that they could both agree upon. There's also going to be arbitration in which that neutral third party is going to come in and listen to both sides of the conflict and see basically make a decision based on both sides of the conflict and the individuals involved. Now, also through arbitration, it could usually this is done, the third party individual is usually done by someone of high authority, a manager, or HR, whatever that may be. And this decision that they come up with, it could either be binding or non-binding, which basically means binding the two or whoever's within the conflict, they could either decide that they want to agree upon whatever the arbitration, whatever the decision was have made. They could agree with that. That's what binding is, and then basically non-binding, where they don't have to agree at all, and that the conflict starts to persist. Basically, that was my presentation, and I thank you for listening to my presentation.